Marcus Washington didn't expect anyone to recognize him when he pulled into the parking lot behind Eastridge High. The building resembled most high schools in smaller Georgia towns: weathered red brick facade, a few flags fluttering over the entrance, teenagers loitering near the gymnasium doors. The parking lot was already crowded with parents in their Sunday best, siblings holding colorful signs, and grandparents moving slowly with walkers and canes. He parked his midnight blue Ford Mustang near the chain-link fence and stepped out, smoothing the crisp lines of his deep black navy uniform. His shoes gleamed with a mirror-like polish, not because he was trying to impress anyone, but because Marcus Washington had never learned to do anything halfway. His posture stood out immediately, upright and commanding, his face calm but carrying the quiet intensity of someone who had witnessed life from perspectives most people would never understand. He had driven 11 hours from Norfolk to attend his son Jamal's high school graduation. He could have flown, but the Mustang had been his wife Keisha's favorite car. Even 3 years after losing her to cancer, he still felt her presence most strongly on the open road. The journey had given him time to reflect. 11 hours of highway, small towns, and memories. He'd stopped twice, once for gas at a station where the attendant had thanked him for his service, and once at a roadside diner where he'd ordered Keisha's favorite, peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream. He'd sat alone in a booth by the window, watching trucks roll by, remembering how she used to plan their road trips with military precision despite never having served a day in her life. "You're the spontaneous one," she would say with that smile that still haunted his dreams. "Someone's got to keep us on schedule." Marcus opened the glove compartment and carefully removed a small photograph. The edges were worn soft, with a slight crease across one corner, Keisha holding Jamal when he was just a newborn, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. "I promised you," he whispered, slipping the photo into his inner jacket pocket. "I wouldn't miss this for anything in the world." The walk to the entrance was deliberate, each step measured and meaningful. His chest swelled with an emotion that existed somewhere between overwhelming pride and profound loss. Every milestone in Jamal's life was both a celebration and a reminder of Keisha's absence. She should have been here, arm linked with his, camera ready, probably wearing that yellow dress she loved so much. Marcus paused at the entrance, taking a moment to compose himself. The brick building before him represented the culmination of 18 years of parenthood, years filled with homework help, basketball games, late-night conversations, and the constant challenge of raising a black son in America. He'd taught Jamal how to tie a tie, how to change a tire, how to stand up for himself without losing his dignity. He'd tried to prepare him for a world that wouldn't always see his brilliance first. A young couple passed by, nodding respectfully at his uniform. Marcus returned the gesture with the slight tilt of his head that had become second nature after 22 years of service. 3 combat deployments, countless missions, and a chest full of medals that stayed in their case except for formal occasions. None of that mattered today. Today he was simply a father, here to witness his son's achievement. Inside the gymnasium, metal folding chairs filled the floor while bleachers overflowed with extended family members. The air carried the mingled scents of perfume, floor polish, and the faint buttery aroma of concession stand popcorn. The space hummed with excited conversation and laughter. Marcus presented his printed ticket to a volunteer near the door, a petite woman with reading glasses perched on her nose and a clipboard clutched to her chest. "You're all set," she said after checking his ticket. "Family seating is up front, 3rd row on the left." "Much appreciated," Marcus replied, his deep voice steady and warm. As he made his way toward his assigned seat, he noticed the subtle reactions of those he passed. Some people glanced at him, then quickly averted their eyes as though they hadn't. Others stared openly at his uniform before whispering to their companions. One elderly man gave him a respectful nod. Marcus didn't react. Being black, tall, and in uniform had long ago taught him to recognize what different looks meant: curiosity, respect, discomfort, or sometimes something less welcoming. He'd learned to filter these reactions, to focus on what mattered. Today, what mattered was Jamal. He found his seat and settled in, adjusting the slightly wobbly plastic chair without complaint. The program rested on his lap, Jamal's name highlighted in yellow, a habit Keisha had started when Jamal was in kindergarten. "So we don't miss our baby," she'd explained, though they both knew there was no chance of that happening. From his vantage point, he could see the stage decorated with silver and blue banners proclaiming, "Class of 2025, in elegant lettering. School board members clustered near the podium, reviewing notes and adjusting microphones. At the far end of the gym, graduating seniors lined up in alphabetical order, their royal blue gowns creating a sea of color against the pale walls. Jamal was somewhere in the middle, tall and lean like his father, with his mother's expressive eyes and quick smile. 18 years had passed in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Marcus remembered holding his son the night he was born. He'd been in uniform then too, having flown in from a deployment in Djibouti with only 5 days of leave. The memory was crystal clear, dirt still under his fingernails, exhaustion in his bones, and the indescribable wonder of holding his child for the first time. "He has your chin," Keisha had whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Poor kid." "But your eyes," Marcus had replied, throat tight with emotion. "Lucky kid." Now here they were. His son, a man on the cusp of adulthood, about to step into the future they'd always dreamed of for him. Jamal had earned a full scholarship to Howard University, his mother's alma mater. He planned to study engineering, inspired by the stories Marcus had told him about Navy vessels and the mechanics who kept them running. Marcus sat perfectly still, barely blinking, absorbing every detail of the moment. Around him, people continued filing in, chairs scraped against the floor, programs rustled, someone laughed too loudly, a woman dropped her purse and muttered under her breath. None of it penetrated Marcus's focus. His world had narrowed to the stage, the rows of young faces in their caps and gowns, and the comforting weight of the photograph against his chest. A family settled into the seats beside him, a mother, father, and younger sister who couldn't have been more than 10. The girl clutched a bouquet of blue and white flowers, clearly meant for her graduating sibling. The mother smiled politely at Marcus. "Beautiful day for a graduation," she offered. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied with a slight smile. "Perfect day. Your son or daughter graduating today?" the father asked, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Bennett. That's our daughter Aisha up there, third row of graduates, the one with the gold honor cords." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Marcus Washington. My son Jamal is in the middle section, tall kid, probably looking nervous despite telling me all week how chill he is about today." They shared a knowing laugh, the universal language of proud parents. "You serve?" Richard asked, nodding toward the uniform. "Yes, sir. 22 years. Navy." "Thank you for your service," Richard said with genuine respect. "My brother was Army. 2 tours in Afghanistan." Marcus nodded. "Please thank him for his service when you see him." The conversation might have continued, but the music started, the familiar strains of "Pomp and Circumstance" filling the gymnasium, and the crowd rose to their feet. Some students looked nervous, others beamed with excitement. Marcus stood too, shoulders squared, arms at his sides, the very picture of military bearing. The national anthem followed, everyone placing hands over hearts. Marcus didn't move, he didn't need to. His entire presence was a living salute to the country he had served for 22 years. He thought of Keisha again, how she would have cried through the entire ceremony, how she would have adjusted Jamal's cap 3 times before letting him join his classmates, how she would have brought an embarrassingly large bouquet and insisted on taking hundreds of photos. "I'm doing my best," he thought, hoping somehow she could hear him. "He's everything we hoped he'd be." His eyes remained fixed forward, but as the last note of the anthem faded, he noticed 2 uniformed men walking purposefully down the side aisle. They were heading directly toward him. The security guards moved with an air of authority. They weren't police officers, their badges read Paramount Security Services, and their uniforms consisted of standard black polo shirts tucked into tactical pants. Both wore earpieces connected to radios clipped to their belts. Neither looked older than 35. One was short with broad shoulders, a clean-shaven head, and a tight expression that suggested he took his job very seriously. The other was taller and lankier, chewing gum with casual indifference as though he had somewhere better to be. Marcus noticed them immediately but didn't flinch. His years of training had taught him that stillness often commanded more respect than movement. He kept his eyes forward, hands resting loosely on his thighs. The shorter guard stopped beside him and leaned down just enough to be heard over the ambient noise. "Excuse me, sir," he said in a low voice. "We're going to need you to come with us." Marcus slowly turned his head. "Is there a problem?" The taller guard stepped forward. "Yeah, this section's reserved for immediate families of graduating seniors." Marcus blinked once, then reached into his coat pocket and produced the same printed ticket he'd shown at the door. "This is my assigned seat. Third row, left side, family seating." It was confirmed when I entered. The shorter guard didn't even glance at the ticket. "We've been informed this section is at capacity." "It was at capacity when I sat down," Marcus replied calmly. "Who exactly issued that order?" Mrs. Bennet leaned forward slightly. "He's been sitting here since before we arrived. There's no issue with space." The taller guard shifted his weight uncomfortably. He clearly hadn't expected such a measured response or outside support. "Look, it's not a big deal," he said with forced casualness. "There are some extra seats in the back section. Let's not make this into something it doesn't need to be." Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with quiet assessment. "I drove 11 hours to watch my son walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here." By now, several heads had turned in their direction. A woman 2 rows ahead nudged her husband and nodded toward the developing situation. Someone in the bleachers angled their phone slightly, possibly recording the interaction. The shorter guard straightened his posture and glanced around. "Sir, I'm going to ask one more time." "You can ask all day," Marcus interrupted, his voice lower now, firmer. "I'm not moving." The taller one clicked his tongue against his teeth. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying." And there it was, the subtext beneath the words. The phrase wasn't about logistics or policy, it was about something older, something that had followed Marcus throughout his life in boardrooms, waiting rooms, front porches, and even on naval bases. It always lurked just behind a smile, just beneath a seemingly innocent suggestion. Marcus didn't respond. The atmosphere shifted perceptibly as people began sensing that a line had been crossed. The shorter guard noticed it too. He adjusted the radio on his belt and muttered something into the microphone without breaking eye contact. Marcus remained seated, staring straight ahead as though the conversation had concluded, because for him, it had. An elderly black woman seated beside him leaned slightly in his direction and whispered, "Don't you let them move you, young man." He acknowledged her with a slight nod but said nothing. He hadn't come to create a scene, he had come to witness his son's achievement like any other proud parent. But the guards weren't finished. The taller one lowered his voice again. "Look, if you've got a problem, take it up with the school administration office. We're just following orders." Marcus turned toward him once more. "You have a name, son." The guard blinked, taken aback. "It's Officer Reynolds." "Not officer," Marcus corrected him. "You're private security." The shorter guard stepped closer. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up." He didn't finish his sentence because at that moment, the gymnasium door at the far end opened, and 6 men entered the space one after another. They wore no uniforms or badges, but their bearing was unmistakable, firm postures, squared shoulders, and expressions that conveyed they had faced far more challenging situations than this awkward confrontation. They didn't enter as a group but filtered in individually, taking different positions throughout the gymnasium as though they weren't together. Yet anyone observing closely could tell they moved with the same disciplined economy of motion, scanned the room with the same tactical awareness, and carried themselves with the same quiet confidence. The first to enter was Devin Carter, tall with a salt and pepper beard and a fitted charcoal suit over a crisp white shirt. His eyes swept the room once before locking onto the situation near Marcus. He moved unhurriedly toward a seat several rows back, never taking his gaze off the security guards. Next came Terrell Jackson, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, wearing a navy blazer over a light blue shirt. He found a position along the right side of the gymnasium, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Michael Chen entered third, lean and athletic, his dark hair cut short and precise. He took a seat near the back, positioned where he could observe the entire space. They were followed by James Rodriguez, Anthony Miller, and Keith Thompson, each entering separately, each finding a strategic position, each maintaining the same alert but calm demeanor. Marcus didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew exactly who they were. But the security guards didn't, at least not yet. They were about to find out. Marcus maintained his focus on the stage. His expression remained neutral, but something inside him had shifted, not toward anger, but toward a state of heightened awareness. It was the mental switch he rarely activated unless absolutely necessary, the one built for survival, for maintaining balance under pressure, for patience in the face of provocation. The two guards continued hovering nearby. Their presence wasn't about performing their job anymore, it had become about asserting authority. What they failed to understand was that Marcus had operated in environments where authority meant the difference between life and death, not in a high school gymnasium filled with folding chairs and proud families. A student's name was called from the stage, and the crowd applauded politely, but the people seated nearby weren't fully engaged with the ceremony anymore. Their attention had been captured by the standoff unfolding in their midst, though they pretended not to notice. The principal, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun, glanced toward the disturbance with a furrowed brow. She whispered something to an assistant, who nodded and began making her way toward the back of the gymnasium. The taller guard, Reynolds, shifted his stance again and leaned closer, lowering his voice further. "I'm trying to do you a favor here, all right? This doesn't need to get ugly." Marcus's eyes flicked to him. "You don't have that kind of favor to offer." Reynolds drew back slightly, reconsidering his approach, but the shorter guard, Wilson, according to his name badge, was less subtle. He clearly disliked being challenged. His hand hovered near his radio again, ready to escalate the situation. A few rows behind them, Devin stood up slowly. At first, no one noticed. He didn't speak or make any dramatic gestures, he simply crossed his arms and fixed his gaze on the confrontation. After a moment, he took a seat near the aisle without shifting his attention from the scene. Terrell mirrored the action from his position along the wall, same posture, same intentional presence. Then Michael. They didn't communicate verbally, they didn't need to. Marcus knew them all. He didn't turn to look because his instincts didn't require visual confirmation. He had led these men through mud, gunfire, and darkness deeper than most civilians could imagine. Wilson leaned down again, his voice now carrying an edge that hadn't been present before. "Listen, man, you're making this into a situation." "And you're not listening," Marcus interrupted, turning his head slowly and deliberately. Wilson's hand moved toward his radio again, but before he could speak, a voice cut through the tension from several feet away. "Is there a reason this man is being harassed?" The voice was clear, controlled, and commanding, the kind that doesn't need to rise to command attention. Instead, it dropped just enough to make everyone else stop talking. It came from Devin, who had moved into the center aisle. His presence seemed to fill the space, not through intimidation but through the quiet authority that comes from experience. Wilson looked up, caught off guard. "Who are you?" Devin didn't answer the question. Instead, he took one step forward. "I asked you a question." Reynolds raised a hand in a placating gesture. "Sir, we have this under control." "No," Devin replied, his tone sharper now. "You don't. Another man stood up from the far bleachers, then another. 4 of them were now on their feet, positioned strategically throughout the gymnasium. Marcus remained seated, still quiet. The entire left side of the gymnasium was now openly watching the confrontation. A child pointed, a teacher attempted to redirect attention back to the graduation ceremony, but no one was looking at the diplomas being handed out anymore. Devin took another step forward. "You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this situation worse than you can handle." Wilson glanced at Reynolds, who was looking considerably less confident with each passing second. It was becoming clear that they hadn't anticipated this level of support, especially not from men with such commanding presence. "I don't care what orders you received," Devin continued. "You don't put your hands on that man. You don't tell him to move. You don't ask again." A profound silence fell over the gymnasium, not born of fear but of respect. It began to spread as more people realized what was happening. Marcus finally looked up at Devin and gave the smallest nod, not a thank you, not a request for intervention, just an acknowledgement between warriors. Devin's expression softened momentarily before he stepped back and took his seat again, arms still folded across his chest. But the tension lingered in the air. The spectators waited to see what the security guards would do next. The gymnasium, the stage, the banners, the faces, all faded into the background of Marcus's consciousness. His eyes remained open, but his mind transported him back 17 years to Somalia. It had been early evening in Mogadishu. The sun didn't set gently there, it plunged below the horizon like a stone, transforming the sky from blazing orange to deep indigo within minutes. Marcus, a lieutenant commander then, had just finished briefing his team when chaos erupted. A massive explosion rocked the embassy annex, sending concrete and glass raining down like deadly hail. The building's eastern wing collapsed almost immediately, trapping personnel inside. Marcus didn't hesitate. He moved instinctively, ducking through smoke-filled corridors, navigating past fallen beams and sparking electrical wires. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with dust and the acrid smell of burning materials. He found 7 people trapped behind a partially collapsed wall, most of them injured. One man was attempting to lift a fallen support beam that pinned another beneath it. That was Devin Carter, a diplomatic security officer with just 6 months in country and a severe gash across his forehead. "You're bleeding," Marcus had said as he dropped to his knees beside him. "You noticed," Devin replied through gritted teeth, still struggling with the beam. Marcus grabbed the edge of the heavy metal support and braced himself. "On 3. 1, 2. Together they lifted, muscles straining, until the trapped man could pull himself free. Marcus immediately began organizing the evacuation, assessing injuries, and creating a plan to move through the increasingly unstable structure. "Where's Michaels?" he asked, scanning the group. Devin pointed toward a section where flames were beginning to spread. "Still in the communications room. Said he needed to destroy sensitive materials." Without hesitation, Marcus moved toward the fire. The heat intensified with each step, forcing him to crouch lower. He found Michaels unconscious on the floor, overcome by smoke. Marcus hoisted the man over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and began the treacherous journey back. A secondary explosion rocked the building as they neared the exit. Marcus stumbled but didn't fall. His lungs burned, his eyes watered, but he kept moving forward, one step at a time. When they finally emerged into the relative safety of the courtyard, Devin was waiting with the others, having helped evacuate everyone else. No words were exchanged, just a look of profound understanding. Later, after the medical teams had arrived and the situation stabilized, Devin approached Marcus, who was sitting quietly on the edge of an ambulance, refusing treatment until everyone else had been seen. "You didn't have to go back in there," Devin said. Marcus looked up at him. "Yes, I did." That was the moment a bond formed, not through lengthy conversations or dramatic declarations, but through the simple recognition of shared values. From that day forward, there was never a question of whether Devin would be there if Marcus needed him. The answer was always yes, without hesitation. The same was true of the others. Terrell had been with Marcus during a hostage rescue in Yemen that went sideways. Michael had served alongside him during a classified operation in the Philippines. James, Anthony, and Keith had all been part of his team at various points during his career. They had shared meals, stood watch together, trusted each other with their lives. They weren't just former teammates, they were brothers in every way that mattered. Back in the gymnasium, Devin sat quietly in his chair, eyes fixed on the security guard still standing near Marcus. He wasn't thinking about Somalia now, he was thinking about promises, the unspoken kind that endure across years and continents. The man who had pulled him from a burning building was now being harassed at his son's high school graduation for simply existing in a space where someone had decided he didn't belong. Devin's jaw tightened at the thought. Marcus glanced toward the back of the gymnasium briefly. His eyes met Terrell's, that was enough. But the security guards didn't understand what those looks signified. Not yet. The moment they made their next move, they would learn quickly. The graduation ceremony continued, at least superficially. Names were still being called, families still applauded, some a bit too enthusiastically as though trying to cover the tension that now permeated the air. But attention had shifted, eyes that had once been focused on the stage now kept drifting toward the third row on the left, where Marcus Washington sat like a statue and two security guards stood in uncomfortable indecision. Wilson glanced toward the front where a school administrator was trying to catch his attention. The woman looked concerned, mouthing something and gesturing subtly, but Wilson shook his head. He had initiated this confrontation, and his pride wouldn't allow him to walk away without some form of resolution. Reynolds shifted his weight again, jaw working harder on his gum, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to be the first to back down. "Sir," Wilson said again, louder this time, "this is your last warning." Marcus didn't move. To do what, exactly? Wilson stepped forward, leaning in so close his belt buckle nearly touched Marcus's knee. "To stop making a scene. We don't want any trouble. Just move to the back." Marcus turned his head and looked directly into Wilson's eyes. "You're the only one causing trouble here." Wilson's nostrils flared with anger. That's when his professional facade slipped completely. "You think wearing that uniform makes you special? This is a high school graduation, not your military base." A hush fell over the nearby rows. A little girl stopped fidgeting in her seat. A father lowered his camera. Even Reynolds took a half-step backward, as though the words had landed with more weight than he'd anticipated. Marcus didn't blink. He took a measured breath, not to calm himself, but to remain centered. "You need to walk away now." Wilson didn't retreat. Instead, his hand dropped to his belt, not reaching for a weapon, but positioned in a way that felt deliberately threatening. That's when Devin stood up again. He didn't shout or make any aggressive movements. He simply stepped into the aisle with deliberate focus, as though the confrontation had become his personal concern. The gymnasium wasn't completely silent, but close. Devin's voice carried clearly through the space. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Wilson turned his head. "And who the hell are you?" Devin took another step forward. "The man who's telling you this ends right now." One of the school board members noticed what was happening and whispered urgently to the principal. An assistant principal rose from her seat and began moving toward the back of the gymnasium, speaking into a walkie-talkie clipped to her blazer. The school staff was finally realizing this situation wouldn't resolve itself quietly. More SEALs rose from their seats, distributed throughout the room, no formation, no verbal communication, just a unified response triggered by years of training and brotherhood. By now, all 6 were standing. Wilson looked around, suddenly comprehending that he wasn't dealing with an ordinary group of graduation attendees. Something was different about these men. They didn't fidget or shift nervously. Their presence filled the space like the pressure before a storm. Devin moved closer. "You have 2 choices, walk away now, or watch this escalate into something you're not equipped to handle." Reynolds finally found his voice. Let's just back off, man. But Wilson hesitated, unwilling to concede. Marcus spoke again, not to Wilson but to Devin. Don't waste your breath. He's already made his decision. Devin didn't smile. He simply lowered his voice one final time. Don't mistake our restraint for weakness. Finally, Wilson stepped back, not much, but enough. His hand dropped away from his belt. His face flushed with embarrassment, but he recognized he was outnumbered and outmatched. The principal appeared near the aisle, speaking quietly but firmly to the security guards. Whatever she said was enough to send them both walking toward the back exit. They avoided eye contact with everyone as they departed. Marcus exhaled slowly, his composure never wavering. Devin returned to his seat without another word. All 6 SEALs remained standing for a moment longer, their message clear without a single word being spoken. And Jamal Washington had witnessed everything from his place in the line of graduating seniors. Jamal stood near the center of the graduating class, positioned between a girl with elaborate braids adorned with gold beads and a boy whose gown kept slipping off one shoulder. They were trying to focus on the ceremony, exchanging nervous laughs and double-checking the pronunciation of their names on their cards, pretending everything was normal. But Jamal's world had shifted the moment he saw 2 security guards approaching his father. At first, he thought perhaps they were assisting someone or addressing a logistical issue. But something in his chest tightened when he recognized his father's expression, composed and dignified, but unmistakably resolute. He'd seen that look before, the same one his father wore when Jamal was 13 and came home devastated because a teacher had suggested he might be more comfortable in the standard math class instead of the advanced placement course he'd qualified for. His father hadn't raised his voice then either. He had simply appeared at school the next day, had a 15-minute conversation with the principal, and by afternoon, Jamal's schedule remained unchanged. From his position in line, Jamal couldn't hear what was being said, but the body language told him everything. He saw the guard standing too close, saw his father calmly remaining seated, and then he watched as a tall man in a dark suit stood up and positioned himself between the guard and his father. Somehow Jamal knew immediately that this wasn't just another parent. This man knew his father, the way he moved, the way he carried himself, the way he created space without aggression. It was clear he wasn't there to create drama, he was there for Marcus Washington. Then another man stood, and another. The temperature in the room seemed to shift. Everyone was watching now, the ceremony temporarily forgotten. Jamal's heart raced. He wasn't afraid, he was experiencing something more complex, a mixture of pride and profound realization. He had grown up hearing fragments of his father's service stories, never the graphic details, as his father kept those private, but occasional references to teammates who sent holiday cards every year, a scar that came from, somewhere in the desert, a locked footlocker in the garage labeled, classified, that was never opened. He had never known the names, never seen the faces, but now they were here, standing as though they'd been waiting for this moment, as though they'd never stopped having his father's back. Jamal blinked hard, fighting the emotion building behind his eyes. This wasn't the time or place for tears, regardless of how powerful the moment felt. The line of graduates moved forward. Names continued to be called. The applause resumed gradually, as though someone had pressed play after a momentary pause. But the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The student beside Jamal leaned over and whispered, "Is that your dad?" Jamal didn't respond verbally. He didn't need to. The entire gymnasium had witnessed the scene, and now everyone in that building understood exactly what kind of man Marcus Washington was. In the audience, Devin remained standing. He wasn't seeking approval or scanning for reactions. He was watching Marcus, who continued sitting in the same plastic chair, hands resting on his lap, eyes focused on the stage as though nothing unusual had occurred. But something profound had happened. The other SEALs maintained their positions too, not posturing, simply present. Their silence communicated more effectively than any shouted confrontation could have. Parents began clapping more enthusiastically with each graduate's name, almost as if trying to compensate for the earlier tension. The gymnasium had become a living entity, awakened by a moment of injustice and steadied by the weight of honor. Marcus remained still, not defiant, not bitter, simply present. A father watching his son take another step into adulthood. But the most powerful moment was still approaching, and when Jamal's name was finally called, no one in the room would be able to pretend that this was just another graduation ceremony. The line moved more quickly now. Some students were still fidgeting, adjusting their caps, whispering jokes to each other, trying to savor this milestone. But Jamal existed in a different mental space. His thoughts kept returning to his father sitting alone in that chair, surrounded by strangers yet completely centered, like the seat had been designed specifically for him. There was something profound about how his father carried himself, calm, quiet, unshakable, and something equally powerful about how those men, those warriors, had risen around him without being asked. Jamal realized for the first time that he didn't fully comprehend the weight his father carried. He had seen the photographs, the medals in their velvet-lined case, the folded flag displayed in the living room cabinet. But those objects had always been silent artifacts. Today, they had come alive. Today, they stood up. The assistant principal called the next name, then another. Jamal was 3 people away from the stage. He wiped his palms against his gown and tried to steady his breathing. The girl in front of him turned and offered a nervous smile. "You ready?" Jamal's lips curved upward. "More than you know." He stepped forward. Across the gymnasium, Marcus leaned slightly forward in his chair. His eyes never left the stage. He didn't applaud for every student, not out of disrespect, but because his focus had narrowed to the young man in the royal blue robe with the gold honor cords, the young man who had his mother's smile and expressive eyes. 1 name. 2 names. Then the announcer paused briefly, cleared her throat, and spoke with slightly more emphasis than before. Jamal Marcus Washington. The name echoed through the space. There was a heartbeat of silence, half a second, perhaps less, before the room erupted. Clapping, whistling, cheering filled the air. But what distinguished this response wasn't its volume, it was its rhythm and depth. The 6 seals, still standing, raised their hands and applauded in perfect unison. Each man clapped with purpose and force, not a performance but a salute without the formality, a gesture that communicated, "We see you. We see your father. We honor you both." Jamal walked across the stage with measured steps, chin high, shoulders back. His heart pounded, but it wasn't from nervousness. It was pride, not just in his own accomplishment but in knowing exactly who his father was and what it meant to carry that legacy. He accepted his diploma from the principal, shook her hand firmly, and turned toward the audience. His eyes scanned the crowd, seeking one person. He found him immediately. Marcus didn't wave or stand. He simply met his son's gaze and offered the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Jamal nodded once in acknowledgement and stepped off the stage. The applause continued longer than it had for any previous graduate. Parents who had remained seated throughout the ceremony were now standing and clapping enthusiastically. Some wiped tears from their eyes, moved by something they couldn't fully articulate but felt deeply nonetheless. Marcus settled back in his chair and allowed the moment to wash over him. He wasn't the type of man to display emotion publicly, but internally, something shifted, not grief or pain, but a profound sense of completion, even though he knew their journey together was far from over. The ceremony continued. More names were called, more diplomas distributed, but something fundamental had changed. From that moment forward, every student who crossed the stage did so in the echo of what had just transpired, not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it was authentic and powerful. The final name was called 30 minutes later. Everyone stood as the graduating class moved their tassels from right to left, cheered with relief, and embraced one another as though they hadn't seen each other in years. Phones captured the moment, cameras flashed, and colorful balloons bobbed above the crowd as students began filing out through the gymnasium's double doors toward the courtyard. Marcus remained seated momentarily, absorbing the scene around him, the music, the laughter, the flashes of blue gowns sweeping past. His eyes followed Jamal as his son disappeared into the hallway with his classmates. A teacher gave him a high five, another pulled him in for a congratulatory hug. Even amid the chaos, Jamal turned once, just once, and looked back. Marcus caught it, a brief glance that conveyed everything. "Did you see me?" And Marcus's expression provided the answer, every second. As the crowd thinned, people shuffling out with flowers and balloons, congratulating each other with exuberant embraces, Marcus finally stood. He stretched subtly, feeling the stiffness from sitting in one position for so long. Devin approached as the gymnasium emptied. He didn't speak immediately, just looked at Marcus, then toward the exit. "You okay?" Devin finally asked. Marcus nodded. "I've been through worse." Devin's mouth curved slightly. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." "No," Marcus agreed quietly. "It shouldn't have." Another SEAL, Terrell Jackson, joined them. "We tried to keep a low profile, but when that guy put his hand near his belt." Marcus raised his hand gently, stopping him. "You all did exactly what needed to be done. That was enough." The three men stood in silence for a moment longer, letting the noise drain from the room. Then Marcus said simply, "I want to see my son." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the concrete courtyard. Students gathered in clusters, posing for photographs, tossing their caps into the air again, calling out to relatives across the lawn. Jamal stood near the flagpole, his gown unzipped halfway, diploma clutched in one hand and his phone in the other. When he spotted his father approaching, he immediately ended his conversation and stepped forward. They met halfway. Jamal spoke first. "You okay, Dad?" Marcus nodded. "Are you?" "Yeah," Jamal replied, then looked down briefly. "They tried to move you." "I know." Jamal's jaw tightened. "I was ready to walk off that stage. I swear, I was 2 seconds from saying something." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "And that's precisely why you didn't need to." Jamal looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "Because you knew I could handle it, and because you handled your moment with dignity. You didn't let anyone take that away from you." Jamal took a deep breath. "Who were those men who stood up?" Marcus glanced behind him. The 6 SEALs were now outside too, gathered near the exit, talking quietly among themselves. They weren't seeking attention, just maintaining awareness, as they always did. "They're men I've bled with," Marcus said simply. "Men who understand what loyalty means. Men who don't forget." Jamal nodded slowly, processing this. "That was powerful." "It was necessary," Marcus replied. "Sometimes silence speaks louder than shouting. Sometimes standing up without saying a word communicates more than 1,000 speeches." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jamal smiled. "You going to tell me those deployment stories now?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Some of them. You're old enough for the real versions now." They stood side by side, shoulders nearly touching, not just father and son, but 2 men connected by something that transcended ordinary bonds. Across the courtyard, Devin raised his hand slightly, not a wave, just an acknowledgement of respect. Jamal returned the gesture without hesitation. The sun continued its descent, but for the Washington men, time moved differently now. Most of the crowd had dispersed by the time Marcus and Jamal walked to the parking lot. A few families lingered, laughing around folding chairs or loading vehicles with flower arrangements and graduation gifts, but the excitement had quieted to a gentle hum of satisfaction. Marcus unlocked the Mustang, the same car Keisha had driven to parent-teacher conferences and weekend trips to visit colleges. Jamal paused at the passenger door, running his fingers along a small scratch near the handle. "Mom would have been screaming the loudest today," he said softly. "She would have made you retake every photo until your smile looked just right," Marcus replied with a gentle smile. They climbed in, closing the doors behind them. The car was warm from the afternoon sun, but it felt like a sanctuary, a private space sealed off from the rest of the world. For several breaths, neither spoke. Then Jamal turned to face his father. "I have to ask, why didn't you say anything to those guards? You just sat there." Marcus tapped the steering wheel once, then turned toward his son. "Because I don't have to justify who I am, and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard." Jamal looked out the window momentarily, considering this. "You know how many times in my life I've had to choose between escalating a situation or letting it resolve itself?" Marcus continued. "What happened today, what those men attempted to do, it wasn't new. But how we respond, that's what defines us." "But they disrespected you," Jamal said. "In front of everyone." "Yes," Marcus acknowledged. "And everyone saw it. But they also witnessed the truth. They saw 6 men who had every reason to be somewhere else stand up, not because I asked them to, but because they understood what that moment represented." Jamal contemplated this. "Son," Marcus said, his voice deepening with emotion, "life will present you with countless opportunities to react with anger, and sometimes that anger is justified. But most times, dignity leaves a more lasting impression. That's what people remember." He reached into his jacket and removed the folded photograph, Keisha holding infant Jamal, her smile radiant despite her exhaustion. "I carried this with me through Somalia. I carried it through losing your mother. And I carried it here today, not because it gives me strength, but because it reminds me what's worth protecting." Jamal's voice grew quieter. "You always knew they had your back." Marcus smiled. "I didn't need to know. I had faith. Real brotherhood doesn't disappear when circumstances become uncomfortable. It shows up and stands firm." There was a pause before Jamal spoke again. "I want to be like that. Like you." "You already are," Marcus assured him. "You walked across that stage with pride. You didn't allow anger to steal your moment. You remained centered even when everything around you was trying to throw you off balance." Outside the car, the last of the SEALs were getting into their vehicles. Devin gave one final glance toward the Mustang before driving away. Marcus acknowledged him with a slight nod, no words necessary, just the quiet recognition of something permanent and unbreakable. Jamal leaned back in his seat. "So what now?" Marcus turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life, powerful and steady. "Now we drive home. You get to choose dinner." Jamal grinned. "Mama Etta's soul food?" Marcus chuckled. "Of course." As they pulled out of the parking lot, the school receded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of what had transpired inside that gymnasium would remain vivid for everyone who had witnessed it. For Jamal, this day marked something far more significant than receiving a diploma. It was the day he truly understood that manhood had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with how you carry yourself when the world challenges your dignity. Some people shout to be noticed. Others stand in silence and are never forgotten. The drive to Mama Etta's took them through the heart of town, past the courthouse with its imposing columns, the public library where Jamal had spent countless hours as a child, and the community center where Marcus had coached youth basketball during his shore rotations. Each landmark held memories, layers of their shared history in this small Georgia community. "Remember when you scored 32 points in the championship game?" Marcus asked, glancing at his son as they stopped at a red light. Jamal laughed. "I remember you telling me not to showboat after that behind-the-back pass." "It was unnecessary," Marcus replied with a smile. "But it was also pretty impressive." The light changed, and they continued down Main Street, where storefronts displayed congratulatory messages for the graduating class. "Congrats Eastridge seniors," read one bakery sign. "Future leaders of tomorrow," proclaimed another. Mama Etta's Soul Food occupied a corner building with large windows and a hand-painted sign that had faded slightly over the years. The parking lot was already filling with other graduation parties, families in their Sunday best, proud grandparents moving slowly with canes, younger siblings running between parked cars despite parents' warnings to be careful. As Marcus pulled into a space near the entrance, Jamal noticed a familiar vehicle 3 spots down, a black SUV with government plates. "Isn't that?" Marcus nodded. "Looks like Devin and the others had the same idea." Inside, the restaurant hummed with activity. The aroma of fried chicken, collard greens, and freshly baked cornbread enveloped them immediately. Ceiling fans spun lazily overhead, and framed photographs of local sports teams and community leaders covered the wood-paneled walls. A jukebox in the corner played Al Green softly enough for conversation but loud enough to fill the space with warmth. Mama Etta herself, a formidable woman in her 70s with silver hair and a perpetual smile, spotted them from behind the counter and made her way over, arms outstretched. "There he is," she exclaimed, pulling Jamal into a tight embrace. "My college-bound genius. Let me look at you." She held him at arm's length, examining him with the critical eye of someone who had known him since he was in diapers. "Handsome as ever," she declared. "Just like your daddy." She turned to Marcus and embraced him too. "And you, Commander. Looking sharp as always." "Thank you, Miss Etta," Marcus replied with genuine affection. "It's good to be home." "Well, come on back," she said, gesturing toward the rear of the restaurant. "I've got your usual table ready. And it looks like you've got some friends waiting." She led them through the crowded dining room, past tables of families celebrating various milestones, birthdays, anniversaries, graduations. Near the back, in a semi-private alcove, sat the 6 seals, already working their way through baskets of cornbread and glasses of sweet tea. Devin stood as Marcus and Jamal approached. The others followed suit, creating a moment that felt ceremonial without trying to be. "Hope you don't mind us crashing your celebration," Devin said, extending his hand to Jamal. "I'm Devin Carter. I served with your father in Somalia." Jamal shook his hand firmly. "It's an honor to meet you, sir. Thank you for being there today." The introductions continued around the table: Terrell Jackson, Michael Chen, James Rodriguez, Anthony Miller, and Keith Thompson. Each man shook Jamal's hand with respect, each offered congratulations, and each shared a brief comment about having served with his father. "Your dad pulled me out of a firefight in Yemen," Terrell said. "Carried me half a mile with a bullet in his own shoulder." "He never told me that," Jamal replied, glancing at his father. Marcus shrugged slightly. "Wasn't relevant to your algebra homework." The men laughed, and the tension that had built throughout the day began to dissolve. They settled around the large table, and Mama Etta returned with menus, though everyone knew they were unnecessary. This was a place where regulars ordered the usual, and newcomers were guided to house specialties with gentle insistence. "So, Howard University," Michael said, turning to Jamal. "Engineering, right?" Jamal nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "Your father keeps us updated," Michael replied with a smile. "Christmas cards, emails. He's been bragging about you for years." "Really?" Jamal looked at his father, who suddenly seemed very interested in the menu he'd been handed. "Really," Devin confirmed. "We know about the science fair projects, the basketball championships, the debate team victories. We've been following your journey from a distance." "All of you?" Jamal asked, looking around the table. The men nodded. "Your father saved our lives in more ways than one," James explained. "That creates a bond that doesn't break. When he hurts, we hurt. When he's proud, we're proud. When his son graduates with honors," Anthony added, "we show up." Jamal felt a lump forming in his throat. He'd always known his father was respected, had always understood that his military career involved deep connections with others who served. But he'd never fully grasped the extent of those bonds, how they transcended time and distance, how they manifested in moments like today. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't need to say anything," Keith assured him. Just know that your father's legacy extends far beyond what you've seen. And by extension, so does yours. Mama Etta returned with a tray of drinks, sweet tea for most, water for Marcus, who had never developed a taste for sugar despite years in the South. "Y'all ready to order, or you need more time to catch up?" she asked, pencil poised over her notepad. "I think we're ready," Marcus replied, looking around the table for confirmation. The orders came rapid fire: fried chicken, smothered pork chops, catfish, with sides of mac and cheese, collard greens, black-eyed peas, candied yams. Jamal requested his favorite, Mama Etta's famous fried chicken with extra spicy seasoning, mac and cheese, and cornbread with honey butter. As Mama Etta collected the menus and headed toward the kitchen, the conversation shifted naturally to stories from the past, deployments shared, challenges overcome, moments of both terror and triumph. They were careful with details, mindful of classified information even years later, but the essence came through clearly: these were men who had faced death together and emerged stronger for it. Jamal listened, fascinated by glimpses into a side of his father he'd never fully known. He heard about Marcus leading a team through a sandstorm to reach an extraction point, about him negotiating with local tribal leaders to secure safe passage for civilians, about him spending hours teaching younger sailors to read and write during downtime on deployment. "Your father has a gift," Terrell explained between bites of cornbread. "He can see the best in people even when they can't see it themselves." "That's true," Jamal agreed. "He's always been that way with me." Marcus shook his head slightly, uncomfortable with the praise but not dismissing it entirely. "I just try to meet people where they are and help them get where they need to go." "That's called leadership," Devin pointed out. "And it's rarer than you think." The food arrived, heaping plates that steamed in the air-conditioned room, aromas mingling to create a symphony of comfort and tradition. Conversation paused briefly as everyone savored the first few bites, nodding appreciation to Mama Etta as she checked on their satisfaction. "Perfect as always, Miss Etta," Marcus assured her. "Wouldn't expect anything less," she replied with a wink before moving on to the next table. As they ate, the conversation turned to Jamal's future, his plans for college, his aspirations beyond. The men listened attentively, offering advice about everything from campus life to career paths, drawing on their own diverse experiences since leaving active duty. "Engineering is a solid choice," Michael said. "I went into structural engineering after I left the service. The discipline translates well. And Howard is an excellent school," James added. "My niece graduated from their business program last year. The alumni network is incredible." Jamal soaked it all in, struck by how genuinely interested these men were in his future. They weren't just being polite, they were invested, as though his success was personally important to each of them. As the meal progressed, Devin turned to Marcus. "So, what's next for you? Retirement's coming up soon, isn't it?" Marcus nodded. "Next spring. 25 years. Any plans?" Terrell asked. "A few ideas," Marcus replied. "There's a veterans outreach program in Norfolk that's been trying to recruit me. And I've been thinking about teaching, maybe ROTC at the college level." "You'd be an excellent teacher," Devin said. "You already are, whether you have the title or not." The conversation continued, weaving between past, present, and future. Dessert arrived, peach cobbler with vanilla ice cream, Keisha's favorite, and they raised their glasses in a toast. "To Jamal," Devin said. "For his achievements today and all that lies ahead." "To Jamal," the others echoed. "And to Marcus," Devin added. "For showing us all what it means to stand your ground with dignity." The men nodded solemnly, the events of the day still fresh in their minds. "And to Keisha," Marcus said quietly. "Who would have been the proudest of all?" To Keisha, they responded, those who had known her smiling at memories, those who hadn't honoring her importance nonetheless. As the evening wound down, the restaurant gradually emptied. Mama Etta brought the check, which Devin immediately claimed despite Marcus's protests. "Not a chance," Devin insisted. "This one's on us." Consider it a graduation gift. Outside, the sky had deepened to indigo, streetlights casting pools of yellow across the parking lot. The air had cooled slightly, carrying the scent of magnolias from the trees lining Main Street. The men gathered in a loose circle, exchanging contact information with Jamal, making him promise to reach out if he ever needed anything at all. "Howard's not far from where I live in D.C., Devin told him. "If you need a home-cooked meal or just a break from campus, my door is always open." "Same goes for me in Atlanta," Terrell added. "Anytime." One by one, they shook hands with Jamal and embraced Marcus before departing, not with dramatic goodbyes but with the quiet understanding that they would remain connected regardless of distance or time. As the last vehicle pulled away, Jamal turned to his father. "That was incredible." Marcus smiled. "They're good men." "The best," Jamal agreed. "I see why you'd follow them anywhere." "And they'd follow me," Marcus said. "That's the part that matters most." They walked to the Mustang in comfortable silence, the events of the day settling around them like a familiar blanket. As Marcus unlocked the doors, Jamal paused, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Mom would have loved today," he said. "All of it, even the drama." "Especially the drama," Marcus corrected with a soft laugh. "She always did appreciate a good standoff." They climbed into the car, and Marcus started the engine. Before pulling out of the parking space, he turned to his son. "I'm proud of you, Jamal. Not just for graduating, not just for the scholarship, but for who you are. For how you carry yourself." Jamal nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "I learned from the best." As they drove home through the quiet streets of their town, past familiar landmarks and toward the house where Jamal had grown up, neither felt the need to fill the silence with words. They had witnessed something profound together, a moment when dignity prevailed over disrespect, when brotherhood manifested in quiet strength, when standing one's ground became a lesson more valuable than any diploma could represent. Some people shout to be noticed. Others stand in silence and are never forgotten. And in that silence, driving through the Georgia night with his son beside him, Marcus Washington knew that the most important mission of his life, raising a young man who understood the difference, had been accomplished with honor.